Hi, I'm Roxanne Richardson, and this is the Casual Friday podcast. In this week's podcast, I make my annual trek to the Minnesota State Fair and see all the wonderful knitted items in the Creative Activities building. And I'll share updates on 2 summer sweater projects. So let's get started. It's the end of August, which means it's the state fair season here in Minnesota. The state fair started out as like an agricultural fair where farmers could come and they could bring, animals or their crops or whatever. They could learn information. They could see what other people were doing. That would be part of it. Then there were things, different kinds of competitions, whether it was for your livestock or creative activities. There were just kind of different displays of new things going on. And these days it's just huge. And a lot of people just go for the food. They're just going from one food thing to another, and they might look at a few things. When I go to the fair, I am there to see the creative activities building first. So that's where you're going to see the hand knitting, machine knitting, the crocheting, the sewing, quilting. You're going to see all of the baking and cooking types of things. There's going to be woodworking, clock making, all kinds of creative activities are going to be in that building. The Minnesota State Fair is one of the 2 biggest state fairs in the country. Our competition for biggest is Texas. They are a huge state with a very large population. Their state fair runs 21 days. So for overall attendance, they win in terms of biggest. In Minnesota, our state fair runs 12 days. We have a population of about somewhere between 5 and 6 million, and over 2 million people will go to the fair. So it's a huge cultural event, where in Texas, it's a much smaller percentage of their population ends up at the fair. And I'm sure part of the reason is that state is enormous, and it would take forever for some people to get there to the fair, where the majority of our population is in the Twin Cities metropolitan area. More than half of the population lives within easy driving distance of the state fair. I usually plan to go to the fair for 2 days. I demonstrate on both of those days. I usually volunteer to demonstrate for the Knitters Guild when they have a demonstration day. And then I'll volunteer at the Weavers Guild, who is at the fair every day demonstrating, all 12 days. And their booth is bigger. They have a floor loom, they have somebody spinning, and then they'll have a third person doing something on a smaller, like portable loom, or like a tapestry loom or a little cricket loom or something like that. So they usually have 3 people there. I was having problems with this frozen shoulder, and I was having problems, especially with long draw pulling back. So I didn't want to volunteer to spin for 4 hours, which is how long a shift is this year. So I only demoed at the Knitters Guild on the very first day of the fair. That's when we were there. We're also going to be there on Labor Day, the last day of the fair. So I always go there. I want to see all the knitting, go through all the knitting. Then I do my 3-hour shift of demonstrating. And I have, look at a few things, eat some things before and after my shift, but then I'm done. I want to go home. And so the second time I go is when I have more time to look at sort of my next level interests. I like to go to the sheep and poultry barn. I like to see the sheep. I like to see for whatever reason, the rabbits are in the poultry barn. I like to look at certain kinds of exhibits. I don't go to the Midway. I don't go on the rides. I don't do that kind of thing. But there are certain things that I like to go to. I like to go to the agriculture and horticulture building and see what they call crop art or seed art, where people make pictures using different colors of seeds. A lot of them have political messages in them. A lot of them will be replicas of like album covers or famous paintings, but all done in seeds. So it's really interesting to see, and that's not in the Creative Activities building, that's in the Horticulture building. This year, the Knitters Guild competed in the Christmas tree decorating contest in the horticulture building. We spent the past year knitting tiny little hats and sweaters and mittens and pom-poms to turn into garland, and we decorated this tree with all these little knitted items. The guild won second place. And I'm like, what won first place? And it was a single person who had decorated the first place tree, and it was things that were related to the fair, like a roll of tickets from, for the midway rides, or just little objects that represented different items in the fair. It was very clever, and it was well done, and they deserved the first place. But we did get second place as a guild. Which was really fun. There are opportunities for entering knitted items in the fair that are not just within the hand knitting competition. We do have the largest hand knitting competition in the country in terms of what's at the state fairs. We are, one of the biggest state fairs. We're in a northern state where people are largely descended from Northern Europeans, like Scandinavians, Germans, people like that, who brought their knitting with them. And I've said this before, knitting is, you knit in self-defense in this state, particularly in the years before central heating and electricity. Those knitting traditions have just stayed here, and because this was an agricultural state, our state fair and all the agricultural aspects of it have remained, and it's just a phenomenal cultural experience. Both my daughters are going to be here this weekend. One lives in Chicago and the other one lives in the Netherlands. Nina, who lives in the Netherlands, she and her fiance Sam flew into Chicago, so they've been there for the past week, and they're driving up together here to Minnesota tomorrow, which is Friday. I'm recording this early because the girls are going to be here, and they're going to go to the fair this weekend and share that with their partners, and it'll be a really fun weekend for them, and it'll be great to have them both here as well. So what I want to do is, I didn't go to the fair the second time. My intention was to go this Monday or Tuesday, look at the weather, see how it went. Monday was horrendous. It was like an excessive heat advisory. I think the heat index was 106. I'll put what Celsius that is on the screen because I don't know. It's probably in the 40 or low 40s Celsius. And then Tuesday looked better, but we had a really bad storm on Monday evening, which knocked out electricity in the fair, and there was some flooding there. And then there was a second storm Tuesday morning starting at about 5:30. And so the fair was going to be late opening. We lost power at our house. The fair wasn't going to open, usually opens at 7 a.m. It wasn't going to open till 9. But the free park and ride where I would drive to and then get the free shuttle bus, they didn't know when that was going to open. And I just said I'm not going to go. I didn't get to go a second time and do more recording of the other activities, but I did do recording of the knitting at the Creative Activities building when I was there on the first day. So I am going to show you that. I know a lot of you really love to see that, and I try to do it in as slow moving as I can. If you want to see something in particular, just stop the recording so you can look at it. The next couple of minutes will be the hand knitting competition at the state fair. So they display as many things as they can in these display cases, and sometimes knitting, whether it does or doesn't win a ribbon, might get put in display cases elsewhere. So the mannequins that are wearing sewn garments, they have like a bald head, so that they might put a hat on it. So sometimes you'll also see cases that are themes like Halloween or Star Wars or something, and items might get placed there that aren't the same creative activity. And so sometimes it takes some looking to find those things. I did film the main hand knitting cases that have all of the first place and then the second through fifth place, which also includes a lot of items that didn't get a ribbon. So hopefully you'll be able to see just how amazing our state fair knitting competition really is. In the last Casual Friday, I was talking about the buttons for this cardigan and the need to stabilize the button band because the weight of these buttons was excessive. So I had stabilized the back with grosgrain ribbon, and so the buttons are sewn to the ribbon so that prevents there being any drag down there. And then I said I wanted to figure out or decide whether or not I wanted to stabilize the buttonhole band. And I checked for that, and I kind of glossed over it, and so a lot of you had questions about this. I buttoned it up, and I wanted to see how the buttons and buttonholes behaved when I was wearing it. Now this dress model is a little thinner than I am, so there's a lot more ease here, so it's not really pulling much here. But when I was wearing it, I have ease in it, but not a ton of ease. So if I'm moving around or sitting or doing whatever, the buttonhole band stretches horizontally. I'm not worried about vertical stretch with the buttonhole band. I'm worried about horizontal stretch. So there's two different reasons for stabilizing button bands and buttonhole bands. The button band is for vertical stability and the buttonhole band is for horizontal stability. If the fabric stretches, horizontally because you're moving or because you don't have a ton of ease in the garment, it will stretch where the hole is and you'll get these kind of scalloped edges while you're wearing it. The goal will be to have them be pretty straight so that it looks nice when you're wearing it. So that was what I was testing. I was testing whether or not I needed to stabilize to prevent horizontal stretch because these buttonholes are quite large. So even though the buttons are also large in order, the buttonholes need to be big to allow the big buttons to get through. So you have this long slit right here and you've got this little narrow piece where it's pulling, and so it can pull quite a bit in this direction in that hole. And so that's what I need to prevent, is to prevent this part from pulling away and creating those scallops. So the thing that I was lamenting last time was that it's kind of a pain to use your sewing machine to put the buttonholes in the grosgrain ribbon, making sure that they're spaced exactly the right distance and that those will line up with the holes in the button band or buttonhole band, and then that you get it sewn on correctly. And 2 people said, well, couldn't you just use narrower ribbon and put it on either side of the buttonhole? And one of them even said, like you did before last spring in the sweater that you did that treatment to, and I had completely forgotten about that. So let me explain, because some of you probably saw this and might remember it when I talk about it again, and some of you may not have seen it at all. So this is a sweater I knit a number of years ago, and the yarn is a Berocco yarn. I don't remember. I'll put it on the screen. I don't remember what kind it is, but it's a chainette construction yarn. So just like the sweater I'm working on right now, this bulky weight sweater, which is a woolen spun and has a lot of yardage, like twice the yardage you'd expect from a bulky weight yarn that was plied. This yarn has a chainette construction, so it's kind of like an I-cord in a way, a little, but there's a lot of air in it, and a lot of stretch, and so it has twice the yardage that you would expect in a bulky weight sweater. So it isn't heavy. It isn't heavy at all. I have these carved buttons on it, and they're shell buttons, very lightweight. This sweater has a lot of ease, so when I'm wearing it, there's never any stretch or pull on the button bands. So there was absolutely no need for me to stabilize either of the bands here, because there's no vertical stretch or horizontal stretch for these bands. Then there's this sweater. This is a sweater I made a number of years ago. It is made from worsted weight yarn, so it has the same yardage per weight as these 2 bulky weight sweaters that I made. It's a lot longer, and it has cables, so there's a lot more yarns. This is a heavy sweater. It comes down like right below my rear end, so it's very long, it's very heavy. So there's a lot more weight to this sweater than either of those other 2 sweaters. The buttons were not heavy, so that wasn't an issue, but the button bands were knit in the same direction as the bodies. They were knit vertically. This is the way the button bands and buttonhole bands were knit all the time until you start to see some perpendicular button bands in the 1950s. You see a few more in the 60s. It took a while. It used to be they were always knit vertically, and now it's very rare, but it does happen. So this is knit 1, purl 1 ribbing, and so when it's relaxed, it's compressed, but as soon as there's any stretch on it, it can get really wide. So there's a lot of horizontal stretch potential. The other issue with this sweater is that the schematic was a little deceptive in terms of the circumference. There is a larger circumference up at the underarms where there are gussets than there is down at the hips. And that gusset was not shown on the schematic. So I ended up with a sweater that was 4 inches smaller than I expected around the hips. And so it was snug. And so that caused, and it's down around my hips and I'm sitting in it. So there was all this stretch. So this button band had gotten very scalloped over the years. And when I learned about this 2 lines of grosgrain ribbon on either side of the buttonhole technique, when I was at our Knitters Guild retreat last spring, I thought, oh, that is genius, because then you don't have to put buttonholes in the grosgrain ribbon. You can stabilize on either side. And so what I did was I took the buttons off, I washed and blocked it to get that buttonhole edge as straight as I could. And I did a wide button, a wide grosgrain ribbon on this side, sewed the buttons to that. And then on this side, I did 2 parallel rows of very, narrow grosgrain ribbon. And I reblocked it, and I'm a little thinner than I was originally, and so I have more ease in it, but I also have this stabilization. So again, the button stabilization is for prevent vertical stretch. For the buttonhole band, it's to prevent horizontal stretch. It serves 2 different purposes, and whether you need that stabilization on both bands may depend on the specific sweater, the weight of the buttonholes, the amount of ease you have, the direction that you knit the ribbing. All of those things combined determine whether or not you might need to do it. And then just testing it, putting it on the button band if you think it's going to need it because of the weight, and then just buttoning it and see what happens when you wear it. Is it stretching? Are you getting those scallops? If so, stabilize the buttonhole band. If not, maybe you don't need to. It really depends on the size of the buttonholes, the amount of stretch, the amount of ease, all of that kind of thing goes into determining whether or not you need to do that stabilization. So I'm making really good progress on my traditional Danish night sweater. It's from this book, A Traditional Danish Sweaters by Vivian Hoxbro. This has got a history section at the beginning about these sweaters. They date back hundreds of years. They're really the oldest type of what we would think of as sweater that there is. And so she's got a whole section on history, a lot of pictures of different sweaters from different regions to show, what the colors that were commonly used, the lengths of them, how those changed over the centuries, the different kinds of stitch patterns, the similarities and the unique qualities you might find in one place versus another. Big stitch dictionary in the center that you can use to design your own. She tells you how you can design your own. But then there's a section of already designed sweaters that her students designed for themselves. So they designed it to fit them with the yarn that they were using. So if it isn't going to be your size, you'd have to figure out how to adapt it or design your own using a lot of the same elements. And that was originally what I thought I was going to do, but then I realized, no, I think this size will be exactly right for me. Now this particular sweater is a little shorter than what I would normally use, and I know that going into it. In order to make it any longer, I would have had to add additional motifs. It's not a simple process to do that. So it's one thing to design something to fit a very specific canvas size using a very specific gauge and how you want to fit it. But if you need something longer or shorter, or your gauge is different and you have these very specific motifs, you really have to think through how to modify something like that. And luckily, I didn't need to do that. As I was telling you last time, I ran into a problem when I was about halfway up that first 8-pointed star there. I started with a skein, knit both sleeves, knit the first band, and then I was pretty much out of yarn. I had several yards left, 5 yards or 10 yards, something like that left. And I thought, well, I'm just going to start the next band with a new skein. And so I did the second band and then joined in the round to work the sweater in the round up to the armholes. And right now I'm past the armholes and I think most of the way done with the third star. I will go to the overhead in a bit and show you more up close what all of this looks like. So the sleeves in that one bottom band were knit with the first skein, and then I started knitting with the second skein. It was probably halfway through that second skein when I saw this dramatic color difference. And I didn't know whether the other two skeins were also different shades or if they were the same as the dark one or the same as the light one, because I had originally bought 3 skeins at the marketplace of our guild's Yarn Over event, and I really wanted a 4th one as just backup. And the person working the booth, who was not the dyer, said, well, we show 4 in the inventory, and we couldn't find it there. And so she suggested that I email the dyer later and see if there was another one. And I did that, and he did have another one. I bought it, he sent it to me, and I just stuck it in the stash, and I didn't notice the color difference. And I didn't even notice it when I was knitting, just because of the way things were being pieced together. I pulled out the other 2 skeins. They were the lighter color. And to me, that was good news, because what it meant was that I had 3 skeins that were all in the same color, and it was enough yarn to knit the entire sweater. But I did not want to rip it all out and start over. I did explain kind of what my plan was last time, which is that I will re-knit the bottom band, cut the existing one out, and then graft it together. And it's going to be a little bit tricky because at the sides, there is some overlap. There's 4 stitches overlapping 4 stitches, and as they overlap, they get decreased down to 3 stitches. And so that was going to be a little bit tricky. And so I just was going to carry on and knit the rest of the sweater, and thinking about how I was going to do that. And I explained that last time. But I was also a little concerned that the other 2 skeins, although they looked the same as the light color, maybe weren't exactly right. And so I would have to come up with a plan of blending them together as I continued on. And so I knew I was going to replace that bottom back band after the sweater was completed. I would use the sleeves as I had knit them, the darker color, and I would attach them to the sweater and see what I thought of it. I was not going to reknit those 2 sleeves now. This sweater, because its fingering weight, has 74,000 stitches or 77,000 stitches. And that's a lot of knitting all of the way through. It's usually more than I can tolerate in one go. But because this sweater continually changes in terms of the star motifs, it was really interesting to me. And so continuing on would continue to be interesting to me. Reknitting is never as interesting to me as knitting the first time. So I didn't want to stop and do that now. I wanted to do it later and then think about how I was going to handle that overlapping. Well, I did do swatching, and as far as I could tell, the colors were not different at all. The other 2 skeins are exactly the same. Just for good measure, I did do some blending when I switched from the 2nd skein to the 3rd skein. I should be able to complete the sweater with this 3rd skein, and then the 4th skein that I have left that matches these, I will use to replace the bottom band, and possibly in the future use it to reknit the sleeves. That will probably be something that I do and finish it February, or fix it February, however you decide to use February. To me, that's a perfect amount of time out and seeing how I like it with the darker sleeves. What I thought was interesting after I laid out my plan was the number of people who had 2 kinds of comments that were very different from what my plan was. In one camp, we have the rip it all out and start over with the yarn that you like. Just rip it all out and start over. There were those people. And or I'm afraid you're going to need to rip it out and restart it. It would be too hard to try to graft that bottom band. And I'm like, no, it's not going to be too hard. It's not going to be as easy as knitting. It's not going to be too hard. I know how knitting works. I know how to graft. I know exactly what I need to do. The tricky part is the overlap. It's just going to take me to, I've thought it through how I need to do it. It might take me a couple of tries, but I'll be able to do that. I try to never rip out knitting that is done perfectly. And what I mean by perfectly is it's the right yarn in the right size, and all the stitches are knit correctly. I try to never rip anything out that was perfectly knit unless it's completely unavoidable. So in this case, the dark band is wrong. It's the wrong color. And so I need to reknit that, and I can graft it to the stuff that's correct. But ripping everything out, there's just no reason for it. If I find I'm knitting along and I made an error 20 rows down across a span of 10 stitches, I will correct that span of 10 stitches. I will rip out the perfect stuff that's above the incorrect stuff, but I'm not going to rip out any of the other stuff because I don't need to. And so I will fix that and recapture all 10 of those stitches, and then use those big long ladders of yarn that are there to reknit row by row all the way back up. I have videos on how to do this kind of thing. I'll link above and down below how to ladder down and fix mistakes. In some cases, you can duplicate stitch over the top to fix things. This works pretty well for cables or for color work. You can use duplicate stitch to fix problems. I've done that. I've got videos on that as well. But for the most part, yeah, frogging, that is not something I want to do. I mentioned that I was really enjoying knitting this. It was really interesting. And so some people thought that, well, that was justification for ripping it all out and starting it because I really like it, so I will like it again. It doesn't work that way for me. I knit the 2 sleeves at the beginning. The first one was interesting, and the second one was less interesting, but it needed to be done. And I thought, okay, I'll get the 2 sleeves done, get those out of the way, and then I can work on the body. Ripping the sleeves out and then knitting them for a 3rd and 4th time, not going to be fun. Re-knitting the thing that was so interesting, as I was knitting the horizontal band and that first star, that was really interesting. Knitting them a 2nd time, not going to be as interesting. It's just going to make this whole thing seem like it's dragging on, and I would be more likely to put it in a timeout or just indefinitely put it to the side. On the rare occasions when I need to completely frog something because maybe it's the wrong size, like I used the wrong needle. I swatched with one needle, and then a month later when I went to knit it, I used the wrong needles and got something that was the wrong size. I still don't frog it all before I start over. I start over with yarn that I haven't used yet, and I wait until I've either used up all of that yarn or I've gotten past the point where I was in the original one, and then I can start ripping it out. Because ripping out everything I've done, making it vanish, is very demotivating and soul crushing for me. It may not be for you, it may not be for other people, but it would be for me. So that was one camp. Rip it all out and start over. One person even suggested I start over with a completely different yarn. And I'm like, no, this is the perfect yarn. I love this yarn. I chose it for this. I want to use it for this. And it's going to work. The 3 skeins that are the right color is the right amount for this sweater. It's going to work. So not going to do that. Then the other camp was basically in the don't rip anything out, but over dye it. So many people suggested over dyeing. So again, I like this color. I have enough of it in the right color to make this sweater. I don't want it to be a different color. And there's a problem when you have things that are 2 different colors, or it's the same color but 2 different color values, and you dye over them, the original colors have an effect on the color that you end up with. Let me get an example. So a couple of years ago, I did a spinning experiment with BFL, which is blue-faced Leicester. I had, I think, 4 ounces of a cream color BFL. I spun it up, and I ended up with this yarn right here. So it's cream color, basic cream color yarn. And then the other 4 ounces there was some cream in it, but it was a lot of tan and brown BFL, natural color BFL. And so I spun that together, and I ended up with this yarn right here. So these are the 2 yarns. And I wanted to see what would happen if I dyed them in the same dye bath. So using the same color to dye them, but one of them is starting out cream and one of them is this other natural color. So here are the purples. This is darker, and it has these other variations in it that the natural brown tan color had in it as well. Here are the blues. So this is kind of a turquoisey blue, and then here's the blue like that. So if I were to dye this with its dark green and the lighter green, and I were to dye it, they would both end up darker. So I wouldn't even out the color. And because I have this initial color to start with, whatever you lay over the top of it, it's going to blend with whatever is underneath it. So, and unless it was the same color and just a lot darker, I mean, it wouldn't work. If it did work, it'd have to be so dark that the darkest part just couldn't take any more dye. It would be like unable to take more dye. It would have to be so dark. That isn't what I want from this sweater. I want the color that I chose. I have enough yarn to complete the whole sweater. I have the option of redoing the sleeves if I need to. I think there were just a lot of people who were nervous about the idea of cutting a piece out, reknitting it, and grafting it together. And that is not an issue for me. I've done it before. I've grafted things together. The challenge in this one is the overlap, but it's not a challenge that I'm afraid of. And I also have a second option. If I'm not happy with it, I do have another option. So let's go to the overhead. I can show you what the sweater looks like, and then I can explain what the second option might be. So this is the swatch that I knit using the other two skeins. I separated them with a row of garter stitch, and they looked exactly the same to me. And I put them on the other sweater, and it looks exactly the same. But just to be certain, when it was time to knit the second star, so this is the first star, the 8-pointed star, and here's the second one. If I had just continued knitting with this skein that I had been using down here, it would have run out at about the middle of this star. So what I did when I started the star is I alternated between the rounds. Knitting with one round with one of the yarns and alternating them so that they could blend together. And then I switched to just working with the other one. And I think it's fine. There's no, there is variation within any particular skein. So there just there's nothing like this that you can see. There's no obvious line. On the side here, there is like 9 stitches here that form this side seam. So you have one of these little mini cables, and they have purl stitches in between them, and then up the center is a knit stitch. So when you get to the length where it's time to do, to separate the front and the back, you just bind off that single stitch, and then you continue with the purl stitch and then the little cable on the side, and then the sleeve will just it's a drop shoulder. There's no shaping anywhere in the sleeve or in the underarm. It's just straight up. These are the 2 different stars. This is what I love about these, is that they're just different. They have the 8 points, and then this one's got kind of this seed stitch. There's a diamond here, and then there's a little diamond in the middle. I don't know how well you can see that. And then this one does a little something different. It keeps the pearls going all the way in, and there's a twisted stitch coming up. So I washed and blocked it when I got to the point where I thought I was supposed to be separating for the underarms, just to make sure the gauge was right. So everything flattened out and is very smooth. And so here, this is unblocked right here. And this is the 3rd star. So this is one that has the little points like the first one, and then in the center is a seed stitch diamond that's full-on seed stitch diamond here. So this is the back piece. There will be a 4th smaller star at the very top of the back. And then on the front, after the 3rd star, there will be a few rows, I think, of stockinette, and then you'll have the neck will start. So this isn't a neck where you pick up stitches and then work ribbing. Instead, it's a square neck, and the little mini cables that we have down here will form across the center of the neck, and then up the edge you'll have those as well. So there's no picking up of stitches later. It's a nice straightforward knit. There's a little bit of seaming of the sleeves to the sides, but other than that, it's really nice. There's not a whole lot of finishing work to do, except for me when I'm having to take apart this and graft it together. So what I wanted to say about my other option, if I have trouble grafting it to this purl row right here, if I have trouble and I just think it's too hard, I can't get this overlap here to work, what I can do instead is take it apart up here at the top of this zigzag. There is a knit row or knit round and a purl round, and I could graft that easily. It would be all the way around. It would be really difficult to do that here where there's a purl round and a knit round, because this knit round also has increases. So if I have to, I can take this band out, reknit, join as normal, reknit this band, horizontal band all the way around, and then do the grafting for the entire round. But my plan is to just do it for across here and do those overlaps. And I think it's going to be okay. I don't think it's going to be too hard. I know some of you are going to say, well, can you film that, demonstrate how to do it? What I will say is I will film it. I can't promise I will show it to you, because usually when I'm trying to figure something out, what you're going to see is my head like this as I'm bent over. It might not be in the screen. I'm not worried about whether or not I'm in range of the camera. I'm trying to figure out what I need to figure out. So like I said, I will record it. I don't know that it's going to be anything that I can show you, but I can certainly show you probably the before pictures when I've separated it out, and certainly part way through, you know, as I've grafted it, and then the finished results. I will certainly do that for you. I don't know when I'm going to be doing that. I might need a break after I actually finish the sweater. I might need a little palette cleanser of some sort, so it might be later in the fall when I do that. Well, that's it for this week's Casual Friday. If you have any comments or questions about today's video, or suggestions for videos you'd like to see in the future, you can leave those down in the comments below, or join the discussion in my Ravelry group, Rocks. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.